One experience that I had was near the end of my mission, and I had worked what I thought was really hard. And if you read Preach My Gospel and you understand what your mission's all about, that it's in the inviting, and it's in, doing your best to invite people to come to Christ, that you find success. It's not necessarily in how that's received. But that can be also really hard to remember throughout each day in and day out, right? To remind yourself it's in the inviting. And I'm sure the European missionaries understand this much better than I do. I'd had some success in terms of finding people that, did come closer to Christ and open themselves up to being changed by the gospel. But a lot of them just kind of felt like, there was this moment and they were really rocking it out and it went well, but, dang, look at them now. Like, they totally moved away from that experience, just not that satisfying. But so as you approach your end of your mission, at least for me, I was doing a lot of reflecting about what have I learned and why was I called here, and what's this all about. And I was blessed with the opportunity to work with younger missionaries at the end, which was so refreshing from my perspective, and very grateful for that. And we were working in this ward. I was in it total of 7.5 months. I knocked some of those doors 3 times, and I had to just kind of act like I didn't know who was going to open the door for the sake of my companion, but like I already knew who lived there and that they were going to cuss us out, and they did. And I was like, oh, looks like they're not interested again, but like there's nothing else I could think of doing in the area but other than to work intensively hard with the ward mission plan and the ward mission leaders and stuff. So we were rolling out this thing where we were trying to get, everyone and all the auxiliary leaders to pray and extend invitations to people they thought we could teach. And our ward mission leader, his almost whole family lived in the ward at one point. They all had houses kind of nearby. Some had moved away, but his sister was married to this non-member guy. And he had always been somewhat, from what I heard, antagonistic to the church. And he's a brilliant guy. He has his own, not missile company, but aeronautical engineering company. And he's this entrepreneur, scientific genius guy who can verbally whiplash anyone who even tries to do anything. And I'd never really met him, but people were like, "Oh yeah, that's Eric Schmidt," and he's gonna yeah, no, And so this guy is the brother-in-law of our ward mission leader, and his parents, and this Eric's his name, Eric's father and mother-in-law were also in the ward, and we ate dinner with them, and they kind of mentioned, Eric, he's known about the church now for over 20 years because he'd been married to their daughter, and we've always been praying for 20 years that he would be ready. We're kind of thinking he might be ready soon. So that was exciting. Wow, we might get to have someone that we're teaching that has no affiliation and might actually be changed by the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so 2 kind of things happened. I don't want to keep this story shorter than I could be, because I could go on forever about every little detail. We decided that the ward mission leader, Scott was the name of the brother-in-law, was going to, he and his home teaching companion, they taught Eric Schmidt's family, his sister's family, and they decided to pray and see if it was time to invite him, if he was ready to hear. So he and his home teaching companion kind of were reflecting on that and trying to, first of all, see if they had the courage enough to do that, because it's kind of putting his family, he felt like he was putting kind of his family relationship up in the air. Maybe it'd be scary, because we all knew how strong Eric felt and how verbally strong he could be. Didn't want to push him away for another 20 years, because he'd already, pushed missionaries out of his house and stuff like that. Well, not pushed, but So they decided they were going to do that, and I was assigned to speak in church. And And so I went to speak in church, and Eric had started coming to church like 2 weeks before that. He just started showing up after the baptism of his daughter, which I attended and kind of met him there. And it seemed to have a profound impact on him, the example of his 8-year-old daughter. So he had been coming to church. So he came to church, and I spoke in church, and I tried to connect with him. I tried to speak to him. And then after that, later on that day, I think, I'd have to look back at my journal, Scott, the brother-in-law, they went over there and invited Eric to have the missionary lessons. And I knew that they were doing that. I remember praying back at my apartment after we got back from church that, his heart would be open, and if this was the right thing and the right time, that he would say yes, of course. And sure enough, he said, "Yeah, I think I'm ready, and I want to, learn more about this. I'm open." And from there, we just had like 3 or 4 lessons, and just all the scary, fear of talking to him and maybe saying something politically incorrect and like getting abused for it, or, him being offended, it just melted. Like he was crying almost like every lesson, because he was just so humbled by his daughter and the feeling like he was prepared for this, like this was the right thing. He still had questions, and he was still extraordinarily articulate about them and was kind of intense, especially for my brand new companion. He was straight from Idaho farm, very strong rural accent, and, kind of scary, different environment. And fortunately, I'd been on my mission for a long enough time to be somewhat confident in helping him. But we taught all the lessons at his in-laws' house, and he was baptized a few weeks before I went home, and has since now, been seated in the temple and served in the elders quorum, and continues to be a force for Jesus Christ. That's what's most meaningful to me about it. Not that yay, he was baptized, the end of story, but his wife for 20 years had attended church on her own and tried to bring her kids and influence them, even though he was not in it. And to see that family now connected together into a family unit that I think is the most important part of that experience. And for me, and they were very vocal about it, I felt like I was the right person at the right time in the right place for him to address his particular concerns. Not that somebody else couldn't have done it, but I felt like because I had been trying to do the right thing for so long, I was fortunate enough to be in that position, if that makes sense. And so the Lord was able to use me for this purpose, and that was a huge blessing in my life.